folks, and welcome to another episode of Kindness Pandemic TV, a channel that is really just made to educate, entertain, and support our local communities. I'm Tom Robb with my good pal Damo Cole, and look, before we get started, we would just like to, as always, pay our respects to the traditional landowners of this country, the Watercolor people, and of course to the traditional landowners of countries worldwide. Damo, mate, what have we got on today?
Yeah, today, very excited to say that we have Chantelle back from Morning Glory Yoga and Art. So if you'll remember last Sunday, she was on our show giving a quick 5-minute kind of rundown as to what you may need for this class. And now she's going to take us through and give us some insight into the kind of finer points of learning how to draw and how to paint. So I know I'm not great at anything artistic, so I'll be jumping in. I'll need all the help I can get. But yeah, listen, okay, well, without further ado, I guess we'll go over to you, Chantelle.
All right, hi guys. Thanks Tom, thanks Damo for the handover. Thank you Kindness Pandemic for having me. It's a pleasure, and during this crazy time, it's so good to be still connecting to the community and offering up some fun, awesome classes. So welcome. If you've just tuned in, my name is Chantelle. You can find me on Chantelle Tranchina on Instagram, and I have a Morning Glory Art in the Park and Yoga in the Park Facebook page as well, which you can tune into later. But for now, welcome to the Mandala class. So shall we get started? Before we do, make sure, number one, you have some awesome tunes playing in your background to get you in the mood, and get those creative juices flowing. And number two, make sure you're fully hydrated. Choose any kind of drink. My drink of choice today is a mushroom latte. So whatever drink you like, whether it be cordial or coffee or margarita, but not for you kiddies, just for the adults. Virgin margarita is okay. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to just direct the camera kind of downwards. To begin with, we are going to firstly create a watercolor background. So to do that, you'll need your watercolors, piece of paper, and the idea is to sort of just come up with any kind of background. It might just be a couple of splatters like that, or it could be more of a blend of some watercolors. And I've got, some examples here, but let's go ahead and do this together. Okay, so you've got your white paper, grab onto your paintbrush. Let's do that. Choose 2 or 3 watercolors. I'm going to go for yellow. So obviously with watercolor, you need to make sure you're using a lot of water and keeping that brush wet. Okay, so you need to work quickly because as soon as it dries, it doesn't mix. So have a go. Okay, choose another color, wet your brush. I'm going to go for orange. Orange is one of my favorites. And I'm going to, there's no kind of right or wrong, just sort of get your color onto the page, blending it nicely. Doesn't have to fully cover everything. And as you can see, even if it drips, that's okay. Even you might want it to drip. Yeah. Okay. So do a couple of those. I'm going to do another one right next to it so I don't waste paper. And I'm going to go for maybe purple this time. So again, this is just for a background, okay? So let's do that. And I'm going to mix it with an aqua kind of blue. Oh, it kind of looks green. But whatever, that will do. So you set that aside somewhere to dry. Okay, and a little bit about mandalas. The name or the word mandala actually is a Sanskrit name, and it actually means circle. So the idea, and if you've seen a mandala before, generally they are a circular shape. And what we're going to do is start from the very beginning using different shapes and our trusty little protractor and compass to come up with, if you can see that one there, a little design, and we're going to start to fill in our design. So firstly, this can be a practice. So grab another piece of paper. Okay. Grab your, if you have one of these, they come in really handy. Compass and protractor, they're really good. Also, if you don't, grab onto anything that you have around the house that is a circular shape. So I've also got here a lid, a plastic lid that you could use, and other options could be mugs, plates, rulers come in handy too. And do you know what? Even if you don't have any of those, you can do it freehand. So anyway, this is what we're going to do. We're going to start in the middle of the page. I'm going to direct that down a little bit. Don't mind me. All right, so you start from the beginning in the middle and adjust your pencil so it meets up to the point. And we're going to just make a couple of circles with our little pencil here. Sometimes it's a bit tricky, but give it a go. Just extending it out a little bit bigger each time to create a bigger ring. Oh, depending on the quality of your equipment here will depend how easy it is. And let me tell you, I don't have the best quality one here. I think this one's from a supermarket, and I think it was about $2. So that's okay. Okay, so as you can see, I've started to draw some circles. You don't have to have the same width between any of them. You can create really close circles, and then you can kind of gradually create larger circles with maybe a little bit more distance between each circle. Okay, so this is what I've got so far, if you can see that. You can also use one of these to create more lines with your lead pencil. Maybe you want to start from the center of the circle and use the edge to create some different shapes. There's no right or wrong here, so this is sort of just like a guideline for your pattern. So what I've done here, I've just put a few of these little line works. You can even go back and use your protractor, but instead of putting the point in the center of the circle, you can put it somewhere else, like on one of those lines here, and then create another circle somewhere else. So I'll have a go at that, and I will keep drawing just to show you guys. Another example. And the idea is to have it kind of circular, but it doesn't ever have to kind of be perfect. Okay. So while you guys are doing that, don't forget to have a sip on your drink, have a little boogie, and I've just added a few circles here. Okay, once you've done that and you've got your basic shape, we're going to begin from the center and work our way out. What are we going to do? I will show you exactly what we're going to do. We are going to utilize some art elements and principles of design, which I have so kindly presented on one of these pieces of paper. So just to have a look here, shape, pattern, repetition, line, and organic shape is always good, geometric shapes. So it's kind of like doodling. We're just combining all sorts of different shapes within our circle, within our layers, to create the end result, the end mandala and the pattern. So here's another example here. I don't know if you can really see that. Yeah, can you see? We don't even need to utilize or use all of them, but there's just some examples. So, using maybe triangles, squares, teardrop shapes, leaves, even just creating different lines by making the lines thinner or thicker, using a bit of a gap between each line and maybe extending that gap to a larger gap or a smaller gap. And these kind of lines here, you can see the difference between a thin line and a thicker line. So the pattern that you can create just using line work is pretty amazing. Another one to really remember is if you're working with black and white, you can really utilize black and white by using and coloring in some shapes. Like here we've got a couple of shapes that are colored in black and a couple that are left white, and you can see the kind of effect that that has. So starting from the center, okay, we are going to start drawing our shapes in. Use a pencil, that is sharp. Okay. So, I'm starting with love hearts from the beginning, from the middle, and I'm going to start working my way out. Now I'm going to use triangles because they're really easy. Really easy shape to work with and quite effective. Triangles are coming up next. Always work with a grey lead pencil, one of these to begin with, and then you can go over it in a fine liner. You can use textures, you can use coloured pencils to give that different effect. But for now, we're just starting with the grey lead in the pencil in case we make a mistake. Some that I prepared earlier, just in simple grey lead, is this one here. And you can see all the intricate different patterns and designs that I've used. And notice how some layers actually extend over to the next layer as well. So it doesn't have to, everything doesn't have to remain in your little line work. It can go outside of that. Another example here, and this one is not grey lead pencil, this one is a fine liner, a black pen, like this one that I used to create this effect. And again, you can extend, it doesn't have to be exactly a circle, but you can extend things outside of your line work. So keep going. Okay. Don't forget to work with and play around your use of the balance, balancing your shapes and your colour. And it's funny how your mood can affect what kind of artwork and patterns you produce. I find if you're in a really relaxed, happy mood, your shapes are more organic, more circular, more soft and flowy. Whereas if you're in quite a stressed mood, you'll find that a lot of your shapes are quite angular and really sharp and edgy. Okay, so keep working with, it's quite therapeutic actually. It's quite fun to just play around and not have anything in mind, but just go with whatever comes to you. And you can do this at any time, anywhere, even in isolation, but not just in isolation. I find it's really fun to do when you're traveling and you're on a bus or in an aeroplane, you have nothing to do, you've seen all the movies on the flight. Highly unlikely, but you know, something else to do. So, as you can see, your patterns start to take form, and just keep going with that. Play around with extending your shapes past one or two layers perhaps. But I tell you what, I am so grateful that we are all still quite connected in some way, because I know for a lot of people it's really easy to have your alone time, and it's really great to have alone time, but if you're an extrovert and you're used to socializing and used to human contact and being around your friends and your family like myself, I'm one of those people that has really struggled during this time, but I've come to really enjoy it now, especially with this extra time. You find yourself working on projects that you don't normally have a chance to, or your passions, which is really awesome as well. So again, thank you Kindness Pandemic for hosting this, and it's awesome to be a part of. And I hope that you guys can produce some really cool artwork while we're here. So just keep going around and around, and just check up on your, mine's not quite dry. So with your backgrounds, your watercolor backgrounds, these are mine that I just produced. They're still a bit wet, but basically there's a couple of ways you can utilize these backgrounds, but when they're dry I will show you a couple of awesome techniques. Yeah, you can simply draw your pattern straight onto the design as soon as it's dry. Obviously it will rip the paper and damage the paper if it's not dry, so that's why we have to wait for it to completely dry. And you can also create a technique whereby you cut out layers of your watercolor pattern, and then you actually glue them on to another piece of paper. And what you get is something like this, and you've got little gaps between each layer, and then you can go ahead and actually produce a really cool pattern on top of your, or in between and on top of your lovely background. This one here is one of my students. I know he's forgotten to take it with him, but this is an example of cutting out a watercolor pattern and then actually sticking it back on top of another watercolor pattern. So there's so many awesome designs that you can do. Okay, so mine's not dry, but as you can see, I've prepared one earlier. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to show you how to cut out your design and basically create a lovely pattern like so. So you need a pair of scissors. Okay, I'll be back, but you go ahead and find your pair of scissors while I'm finding my pair of scissors. Okay, and I'm back. So, you've got your scissors. Great. We're going to go back to drawing our layers on top of your pattern. So, start from the center. Okay. And draw a couple of layers. But this time you want to make sure that between each layer is a very thin layer, and this is the part where we're going to actually remove and cut that part out. So then it will eventually leave a white gap between each layer, like this one. Okay, so I'll show you in just a minute how we're going to do that. Oh. It is a little bit fiddly, but lucky for us, we have plenty of time. Okay, so what I mean is, we're going to have the center and then a tiny little gap and then a bigger gap. And next will be a tiny gap, and in between the tiny gaps is the part that we're going to cut out. So keep going with that one. Okay, so you should have, as you can see, thick, thin, all the way to the end. It doesn't have to go all the way to the edge. It can just be in the middle. You can do a little one or you can do a large one, whatever you like. I'm going to do kind of a little one, and you'll grab your scissors. And begin to cut out the little gap. And now this is a watercolor paper. You can use normal paper, which is what we used at the beginning. But if you have watercolor paper, it always works best with watercolors. But it's just a little bit more difficult to actually cut out. Go figure. Okie dokie. So eventually you make a little hole and you start cutting out the little gap between each layer. You'll also need a glue stick to actually glue your pattern down. So this is my center, as you can see. And then go ahead and move on to the next layer. It's actually a really fun activity to do with your friends as well. If you've got nothing to do, have an art and craft afternoon, which is what I do with my housemates, especially now that we're on in an isolation kind of state. But you can do it anytime you want. Okay, so keep going with that. a point to this, don't worry, we will get there. So, if you keep going, and you will see, just like the one next to it, and you'll see how eventually you'll get the same pattern but with a little white gap between, just like this one here. So keep going with that. It's really effective, and you know what? These actually make a really nice handcrafted gift for somebody. And if you're like me, not really into gifts that much, but I really am appreciative of a gift that somebody has actually created and made themselves. And they look really effective if you print it, oh, not print it, but design it yourself, especially with the watercolor, and then use a black fine liner over your pattern, rub out all the grey lead, and frame it in a cute little frame. It's really quite creative and thoughtful as a gift. So yeah, if you look really closely, you can see the little layer, the little inner line there. That's the part I want to cut off. So then between each layer is that little white gap. And actually you can choose to leave the white gap, or you can even choose to put a design within the white spaces too. So just play around with that. How are you all going? And there's no limit to these kind of mandala designs, because you can literally use any medium, even soft pastels, oil pastel, colored pencil, as I mentioned before. There's just so many different awesome techniques that you can use to create a different effect. Okay, so once you've cut out your new design, I'm just showing you on this paper, I'm not actually going to glue it here, but you can either decide to line up the colors so it's actually fits together, or you can just muddle it up. Whenever you're happy with your design, glue it down on a fresh piece of paper, and then you can continue to create a design on top of that, a mandala design. So using all the elements and principles of art, then you can, I'm going to use this one, and I'd start with grey lead first, and then you can actually start from the center, work your way out, designing a really awesome new design. Always start with grey lead, because prone to making mistakes when you don't. So you can go back to your black and white one later. Okay, we're going to work from this one. Let's have a look here. I'm just going to show you some different patterns before we go on. Some different colors, different patterns that you can also use. As you can see here, there's black and white, and there's coloured, and there's plain backgrounds, or there's different coloured backgrounds. Just to give you an idea, here's some other really nice effects. I just find that it's helpful to have something to look at, to be inspired by, and get some ideas, some fresh ideas. And sometimes people get really particular about everything being perfect. Don't worry. Art is never perfect. In fact, imperfections in art make it perfect. So I love the idea of never using an eraser for my students, either in school or my adult classes that I teach. I'm always an advocate for not using erasers and just going with it. I actually don't even like to use rulers. I like everything to be freehand, but it's totally up to you. My point is there's no mistake. There's no right or wrong in art. Just go with the flow. And I just want to take the opportunity to show you a couple of designs as well. So once you have created your pattern, you can colour it in with any medium you like. This one's a coloured pencil, which is quite effective. So if you're actually planning on colouring it in, I wouldn't be doing so much shading with your grey lead pencil. Just leave everything blank. Also, this is another example that I produced of a mandala just using literally coloured pen and textures. So you can really experiment. And here, I didn't even use the protractor or compass at all. I literally worked from the center here, and my layers are kind of imaginary and overflow into each other. And it's not perfect, but it's really effective. Yeah, so making sure you glue your layers down, obviously, like I mentioned. Okay, so I've just started right in the middle, very simple. I think I'm going to leave my white gaps white, but as I said, you can choose to draw a pattern within the white gaps or just leave it blank. Okay, my other design is still wet, so we're going to keep going. I'd really love to see some finished products when you guys are actually done, and feel free to jump on Instagram to post them. Make sure you tag me, Chantelle Tranchina. There'll be a link, and my links I think below if you want to get in contact, but I'd love to see your finished products. Yeah. It's really interesting to see everybody's take on it and how different the designs can be. I'm going to use my black fine liner just to illustrate how the effect does come out on watercolor backgrounds. This one here is a Faber-Castell, but you can get any kind of black fine liner just with a thin point from your news agency, from your supermarket, from anywhere. that has some sort of stationery. The only time you will need the eraser, the rubber, is when you do want to erase your grey lead after you're completely satisfied with your design. If you don't have a black fine liner, you can try using a black texture or a darker Derwent pencil. So I've got this collection here. It's a collection of 12 pencils ranging from about a H depth to a 9B. If you don't have a black fine liner, you can use a 9B pencil, which is actually, it's almost like a really dark grey, a heavier texture, which will kind of work as the same. So as you can see now that I'm adding the black, it starts to look a little bit more effective. So keep going with that. You'll find with these fun art and craft activities that you'll never be bored again, because there's always something to create, something to do. It's also a good time to just keep learning and improving yourself. My sister told me the other day she downloaded an app that will teach her how to speak Italian. So it's a good time to learn a language, or two even.